Hey everyone, Kevin here, and it has never been a better time to be a fan of mutants than it is in 2024. This year we not only saw a revival of the classic X-Men animated series with the Disney Plus series X-Men 97, but we also just got the hilarious multiversal adventure in theaters that is Deadpool and Wolverine. Now, being the huge Marvel Mutants fan that I am, I decided to seize the opportunity while they're still in the spotlight to try out one of the video ideas I had when I started uploading to this channel again. Reimagining characters in different design styles. For example, Deadpool and the X-Men tend to fall under the umbrella of science fiction, along with most of Marvel comics in general, since they consist of lots of advanced technology and even aliens at times. So in this case, I wondered what some of those characters might look like in the polar opposite style of the fantasy genre. Well, if you'll join me today, let's take a look at the answer to exactly that. Of course, to start things off, I had to make the protagonist of this summer's blockbuster hit, Deadpool himself. Now, with each of the drawings I made for this video, you're going to see a slightly different design process for them, given the fact that I'm fully reimagining them on top of making new designs in my style of fantasy art. Deadpool, for example, here is meant to be your traditional assassin, and most of the aspects of character designs like that are fairly universal. Therefore, I'm mostly taking the elements of Deadpool's design and tweaking them enough that they fit more in a fantasy setting. For example, his costume features cloths and leathers more apparently, and he has a hand crossbow now instead of a gun, and I gave him more belts to tie everything together. I also gave him a dark cloak and hood to help him blend into cities at night a bit more, since that's a classic fantasy trope as well. But the thing I took the most creative liberties with is his power set of regeneration and just overall being nearly impossible to kill. Given the fact that the technology used in the Weapon X program where he got his powers from wouldn't exist in a setting like this, I changed his origin for this rendition to be rooted in magic. That'll be another running theme you'll see in this video. Magic works as a nice catch-all substitute for advanced technology in a fantasy setting, since both are capable of performing feats that we wouldn't think being possible in our lives today. For this version of Deadpool, I actually made him a product of necromancy instead of scientific experiments, but he would be one of those undead creatures that still maintain their intelligence, like a revenant for example. He could be the merc with a mouth if he didn't know how to talk anymore after all. That would help explain his regeneration and unkillable nature in this setting since he's basically already dead in a way. This idea also helped me give a unique take on how I'm going to draw his deformities. Being that he's essentially a walking corpse here, his face is not only scarred and decayed, but his eyes are more sunken in and colorless, resembling that of his iconic mask. Finally, one other thing I'll mention about my design process for these pieces is that Dungeons & Dragons helped me make decisions on what I wanted to do with these characters, so you'll probably see some similar design tropes here. I'm an avid D&D player myself and have been for several years now, so it's easily my biggest connection to the fantasy genre, and it helped me reconceptualize these characters into characters I would see in a campaign, for instance. For anyone familiar with the game, this version of Deadpool would easily fit in as a rogue, being quick, elusive, and able to take out targets with precision and efficiency. So with that, let's take a look at this finished Undeadpool. Now, as far as X-Men go, I knew when I was making this video that I wanted to include the one who started it all, the professor himself, Charles Xavier. This piece was an interesting one to create because it made me realize I don't think I've actually ever drawn a character in a wheelchair before. You'll see I learned from doing this that I needed to map out the chair first before figuring out how his body was going to look in it. What you won't see in this recording is that it took a few tries to actually do that, because normally my instinct is to map out the body and its position first, and then the other objects, but we got there regardless. Obviously, because again, these are fantasy characters, Xavier isn't going to have his classic yellow hover car he used in the animated series, but I did reference it a bit while coloring the piece by adding bits of yellow metal similar to copper in the chair's frame. As far as the man's design, on the other hand, he's a bog-standard human aside from the mutation, so there wasn't much to translate here aside from just drawing him in my art style. Since we usually see the character in some kind of suit since he's a professor, I tried to make that a little more Victorian style, like the kind of suit you would see in fantasy, even to the point of giving him extra accents like a cravat hanging off of his neck. Another major change I added here, as you can see, was changing the portable Cerebro helmet he's used more recently into something more resembling a helmet from a suit of armor. It's not a perfect translation by any means, but my idea was to make it so that this version of Cerebro is like an enchanted item that Xavier would use to amplify his own magical abilities. And that's right, you heard me say magic, because much like I did with Deadpool's origin, Xavier's psionic abilities are rooted in spellcasting here. You'll see extra effects that I added at the end to emphasize that more, but my idea was that the fantasy equivalent to Xavier would be something like a sorcerer or a wizard, since his power set is all mental rather than physical. I even added a few more things like a spellbook, for example, to this piece to allude to his mastery over spellcasting in my version. So, as I finish things up here, let's take a look at Professor X as a mind-bending, fantastical magician. Now this next one was actually the last character that I added to the list from this video. I knew that since most of my drawing ideas here were of men, I wanted to feature one female X-Men character as well to give the roster a bit more variety. And as far as the typical X-Men lineup goes, Jean and Storm had potential, but I felt like they would be too close in concept to Xavier and would just be turned into full spellcasters given their power sets. Though if I do make another video like this, maybe I'll tackle them next. Let me know if you'd like to see that happen. Anyway, I eventually decided on adding Rogue to this video. She got some well-deserved spotlight in X-Men 97 after all, and I really like her as a character, so she seemed like a good fit here. As far as recontextualizing her though, this is where I struggled to come up with ideas the most. Her mutant ability is siphoning the energy and naming the powers of other people and using them herself, though perhaps most notably this allowed her to harness the powers of Carol Danvers, giving her super strength, durability, and flight. Her role in the X-Men as a heavy hitter using hand-to-hand combat somewhat resembles that of a monk in D&D, even to the point that monks manipulate energy, or ki in their case, in similar ways. Therefore, I based her attire here on the kind of clothes a monk would wear, complete with baggier pants, wrist braces, and knuckle wrappings, for example. I had to include a fantasy version of her signature jacket as well, since this wouldn't feel as much like Rogue without it. The fact that she can fly though was a trickier thing to adapt to this concept, but I think I found a satisfying way to make that happen as well. Think of her mutation in this context like a form of curse embedded on her since childhood. She can absorb the life force of others to bolster herself, but at some point she accidentally makes contact with an angelic figure in disguise and absorbs their powers in the process. This effectively makes her part angel, complete with the divine strength and wings to match. I really like how this concept came together since it allowed me to play around with the line work and colors of the wings especially. I wanted to give the impression that the wings act like their own light sources to an extent, and you'll see me make those changes towards the end here. Despite the fact that Rogue was the last pick for this video, I think she might be my favorite of the bunch since she feels more like her own unique identity that can stand on its own rather than just another version of Rogue. That's just my opinion though, and we still have one more character to go through of course, so let's see who your favorite is as we wrap things up. To bookend this video with the other main man of Marvel's latest hit, you know I had to include the Wolverine himself in this bunch. Like Deadpool, this was another one that I had the idea for almost immediately. Basically, I wanted to give Logan more of a wild man look, and to do that I pulled out the age-old fantasy trope of lycanthropy. For anyone who's not familiar with that word, it means someone who's cursed to turn into a savage animal hybrid, typically on a full moon or in some other way where they don't have control over it. So in my version, Logan's pretty much a werewolf, or I guess a were-Wolverine in this case. Anyway, to make that happen, I gave him more animalistic traits such as sharp fangs, a more canine nose and ears, lots of thick fur, and claws that extend from his fingers instead of his knuckles like that of a werewolf. I imagine they would still be just as sharp though and could be extended to their usual length. Ironically, I kind of combined Wolverine and his brother Sabretooth in this design, but for what I'm going for, I think it works. Aside from that, I knew I wanted to hold off from giving Logan a bunch of armor despite him being the biggest fighter of this group here, because he doesn't really need it if I'm being honest. His healing factor makes him enough of a tank, and less armor meant that I could make him more mobile and show off his bulging muscles a bit more. As far as mechanics go, he would probably be closest to a barbarian, someone who doesn't necessarily need armor because their raw strength makes them thick enough that they just survive in a fight just fine without it. So to close out this video, let's take a look at the final product of this rampaging were-Wolverine. And with that, we have 4 beloved mutants redesigned as fantasy characters. This was a fantastic artistic exercise that let me take characters I love and put my own unique twist on them. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Let me know in the comments who your favorite was, and if you'd like to see me take more comic characters, or more characters of any kind really, and draw them in a different genre. Otherwise, feel free to like and subscribe if you want to see more art like this in the future. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.